Hello and welcome, and thank you for all the positive response to this series. We really are overwhelmed at the positivity and the incredible amount of interest that this series is producing. So we will carry on making more. Now, we are carrying on with the Pioneers, and if you've noticed from the thumbnail a car that you don't recognise, this car, Steve Holt is going to tell you later in the video what that is all about, and it is gorgeous, isn't it? So if you don't know what that is, then there's a very good reason for watching this series in itself. But first, this is a car that is from one of those manufacturers that deserved a little bit of luck, and they could have been one of the ones that stuck around in the way that Lotus and TVR did from the early days as kit cars to being a major recognised turnkey brand, and it didn't quite make it. It's one of the nearly cars, but it's also one that's pretty close to my heart. So without further ado, let's hear the story of Turner Sports Cars. When you look at some of the car manufacturers that started out as kit manufacturers in the 1950s, it's hard to realise that, but for a quirk of fate, some other marques could have been the everyday, well-known names that we talk about today, but they certainly deserve remembering. And one such manufacturer was Turner Sports Cars, a notable British kit and small-scale sports car manufacturer founded by Jack Turner in 1951 in Wolverhampton, England. The company remained active until around 1966, producing a range of lightweight, affordable sports cars aimed at enthusiasts, most of which were available as kits. Here's the story of Turner Sports Cars. In the heart of Britain during the early 1950s, amid a nation rebuilding from war and embracing a new wave of innovation, a small company emerged in Wolverhampton that would quietly carve its name into the annals of British motoring history. Founded in 1951 by engineer and former racing driver Jack Turner, the company embodied the post-war do-it-yourself spirit. Jack believed that sports cars shouldn't be the reserve of the wealthy elite. Instead, he envisaged nimble, affordable machines that enthusiasts could build themselves or buy fully assembled. The company made its name in racing with a handful of racing models. But the first road car, or the first established model, was known as the Turner A30 Sports, and that debuted in 1954. Built on Austin A30 running gear, it featured a simple ladder frame chassis and lightweight fiberglass body. With around 70 kits produced, it marked Turner's entrance into the market and set the tone for what was to come. Then came the Turner 950 Sports, launched in 1956. This model used the updated Austin A35 engine and improved styling and handling, again a fiberglass body on a ladder frame chassis. It proved popular in both kit and factory built forms, with approximately 170 cars leaving the small Wolverhampton works. It also saw early racing success, particularly in club events around the UK. Turner's quickly gained a reputation for their agile handling and lightweight design. Drivers found them highly competitive in hill climbs and track racing, frequently outperforming larger and more powerful cars. In 1959, Turner introduced what many consider their most successful product line, the Turner Sports Mark I and Mark II. These models provided buyers with the engine options from BMC or Ford, including the popular 948cc and later 1098cc units. With sleek modern styling, both the Mark I and Mark II saw a combined production of around 300 units. In 1963, the final evolution arrived, the Turner Mark III, which featured the 1500cc Ford engine and further refinements in both chassis and bodywork. Although the company faced increased competition from mass-produced sports cars like the MG Midget and Triumph Spitfire, the Mark III held its ground with excellent performance and racing pedigree. Approximately 100 Mark III units were built. There was also the elusive Turner GT, a fixed-head coupe aimed at moving the mark-up market, introduced in 1962. Although promising in design and concept, only 9 examples of the GT were ever built, making it one of the rarest Turner vehicles today. Turner sports cars weren't just a British affair. A significant proportion of production was exported, particularly to the United States and Australia, where British sports cars were in high demand. Turner's lightweight, race-ready appeal translated well overseas, helping build an international fan base that endures to this day. Despite the company's success and growing reputation, small-scale production couldn't compete with the economies of scale of larger manufacturers. Despite the company's success and growing reputation, small-scale production couldn't compete with the economies of scale of larger manufacturers. Financial difficulties mounted, and in 1966, Turner sports cars ceased production. In total, just under 700 cars were built over 15 years. Their legacy lives on through the dedication of owners and clubs who keep Jack Turner's vision alive, a vision of performance, accessibility, and sheer driving pleasure. But for a quirk of fate, financial pressures in 1966, and not having a supporter financially or a backer to see them through those difficult times. Definitely Turner Sports Cars is one of those marques that could have gone on to become one of the long established sports car manufacturers that Britain are still famed for today. However, that isn't quite the end of the story. Welcome to the MC Acer. Decades later, the spirit of Turner was rekindled by MC, a passionate kit car manufacturer. They introduced the MC Acer, a faithful homage to the classic Turner sports, allowing a new generation to experience the thrill of 1950s motoring. Built on a robust, deep box-section steel chassis, the MC Acer was designed to accommodate Vauxhall Viva or Magnum engines and running gear. Its body, crafted from varying thicknesses of GRP, showcased a blend of classic aesthetics and modern materials. Components like the Volvo 122 windscreen, Morris Marina wiper assembly, and Sunbeam Alpine rear lights were thoughtfully integrated, reflecting the ingenuity of kit car designers. Priced at £1250 for the kit and with an estimated build cost of around £2,000, the MC Acer offered enthusiasts an affordable entry into classic motoring. Its appeal lay not just in its performance, but in the hands-on experience of building and owning a piece of automotive history. Magazine features at the time complemented the handling and the build quality of the kit. In spite of this, sales were disappointingly low, and as the 1980s progressed, Colton Automotive took over the reins of the Acer project, rebranding it as the Colton Acer, whilst retaining the core design. Colton introduced refinements and continued to celebrate the legacy of Turner sports cars through this kit car. Today, the MC Acer and the Colton Acer stands as a testament to the enduring allure of the British sports car. It deserved more sales, but it embodied a bridge between the past and present, offering a tactile connection to a bygone era of motoring. This is definitely one of those that deserved to do better. Now the Acer is as sought after, maybe slightly less so than the original Turner, and it is still appreciated by Turner enthusiasts. They're actually even rarer than the original Turners as well. But I think it is a fitting addition to the Turner story to include the MC, because it really did revive and remind modern enthusiasts of this great 1950s mark. I personally think that Turner is one of those manufacturers that really deserved a little bit more look, and what gorgeous cars they were. It's just that little bit of fate. It's amazing, isn't it? Right, I teased you earlier on, and we were going to tell you what this gorgeous car behind me is, and Steve Hall is going to bring you the tale of a car that briefly shone brightly.
Straight into it today. Another one. Just need to stop the old waffle and get on with it, but because we want to talk about the old cars and not anything else. But anyway, got a cracker for you today. This is a car, and it was a little company that sold their cars in kit form, albeit very briefly, a very, very long time ago. Started out as a special, I think. You could call it a special. And we're going back to sort of the early 60s. But anyway, the car in question, the company indeed, was called Rejo. R-E-J-O. Nothing mystic, no mystique about that. It was simply the first and Christian and last name or surname of each of the two protagonists involved. So you had a guy called Rod Easterling and another chap called Jim Osborne. So there you get the R-E, the J-O. Simple as that, really. And I do like a 60s sports racer, road or track, doesn't matter to me, really. The more obscure, the better, in fact. And if in the latest issue of TKC Mag, or the May-June 2025, I've got to date that, really, because you could be listening to this in 2027. We've got a couple, actually. We've got the WB 120 and the EJS Climax, made by a wonderful chap called Edwin Snusher. Both of those were either Lotus 70, well, Lotus 11 inspired, and they were 50s cars as well. But anyway, Rejo first made notes on this car about 16 years ago. That was the first I'd ever heard of it, and I haven't heard anything about it since, until very, very recently, in fact. And it was I would have done this a long time ago in the magazine, indeed. But I was hindered by missing one crucial piece of information, which was the key to the jigsaw, really. And on the face of it, it's not that important, but to a little story like this, it was. So Quite by chance, I was in a local village to TKC Towers called Mayfield in East Sussex, and there's a little bookshop there, wonderfully named the Old Armoury, run by a lovely old fella. He's only open a couple of times a week, and that's mornings indeed. But it's primarily second-hand books. Well, it is all second-hand books and a bit of antique furniture, um, mainly military and train sort of stuff. But he does some car books, and I've found some real gems in there, and he's not expensive either. But anyway, and I don't think he's got a website. But if you Googled the Old Armoury Mayfield or bookshops in Mayfield, trust me, there aren't many, and you'll find him. And I was in there the other day actually, and I was looking through his pile of books, and I was about to think to myself, well, he's got nothing for me today. When I spotted this book, No Dust Jacket, battered and beaten a little bit, but that's the way I like these old books, really. It's called. I should know, shouldn't I? Because I've only bought it 3 weeks ago, but it's in the collection somewhere. Sports Races, I think it was called. Dates from about 1964, I believe, 65. Um, and at £1, I had to have it. Anyway, when I got home, I always have a good old flick through over a cup of tea, and I was delighted because I saw a mention of right there in front of me, Rejo, and there was the missing piece of my personal Rejo jigsaw. So therefore, here we are. Back to the beginning. Rejo, as I said, the initials spelt were the name of the company. Um, Rod was the main sort of driver of this project, as far as I'm aware. He owned a Lotus 6, which he really liked, and he got that in 1956, and he used it as a daily driver, as well as doing a few sprints and circuit races in it, I think. He certainly tuned the car's 4D93A engine. One thing to say, both Rod and Jim they never had an engineering background. They had no automotive experience other than they liked cars and motorsport in particular. So there was no a natural sort of evolution into making cars. No, there wasn't. They weren't. They were in it, far from it. But they certainly got into it as time went on. And about 1957, I think they joined the South London branch of the 750 Motor Club, called the London Specials Builders Group. And like its North London neighbouring branch, that was packed with future motoring greats, like Colin Chapman and Jem Marsh. So too was the South London area. So Rod and Jim were rubbing shoulders at those packed meetings. I believe they were packed. I've read that they were, with the likes of Eric Broadley, of Lola, Len Terry, Lotus Anteria, Brian Hart, ace engine builder and a really good driver in his day too. Don Sim, who was the man behind Diva, and George Bishop, Heron Plastics, to name but a few. I think Rod's, well, he'd had a few jobs. I think he'd started out with the right intentions in engineering with an apprenticeship at a scientific instrument makers in London, which lasted all of 5 weeks. And I don't know much about apprenticeships, but I know they're a good thing, and I know they lasted longer than 5 weeks. So whatever reason, whether he got the ump and he just chucked his tools in and went, I don't know. Then he worked in the print trade for a few years, which sandwiched his national service, 2 years in national service, spent in the RAF. And then I think from late 1957, he worked for silk merchants, and he was certainly doing that until I lost track of him in about 1990. So he did actually stick to a good career with selling silk, I believe. Meanwhile, Jim had a career in the scientific instruments industry. I think they may have met um, at the where Rod was doing his apprenticeship. I'm not, I don't know. I don't even know partly if that's true or not, but I'm guessing. And I know we shouldn't assume, but there you go. They definitely shared a love of bicycle racing, and Rod was a good rider, and he won the Southern Counties Bicycle Championship at Goodwood in 1950 when he was 18. The intrepid pair of Rejo that made up Rego, they were friendly with a couple of local brothers, Ron and Dave English. By the way, they were based in Blackheath in South East London. I should have said that. And a couple of likely lads called Ron and Dave who were also into motorsport, but they did have automotive experience. And they had a Lotus 6 that they shared. So they had a common liking for Lotus, as many young lads did in those days, and a common liking for motorsport. Around about that time, I think Rod got the idea that he should build his own car, not because he thought there was anything wrong with the Lotus, but because he wanted to build his own car, as people again did in that time. This was the time, of course, of the special and the body shell brigade were alive and kicking very strongly. So he decided to sell his Lotus 6, which seems a bit of a shame, but that's what he wanted to do, and that funded his own build. But before he did that, he got, I think it was Ron English, to draw a copy of his chassis so that he could build a replica of that. And one change though, he wanted wishbone suspension rather than a 6's swing axle arrangement. And they built a Clubman's car between them for the 750 Motor Club's 1172 Championship, very popular series back in those days. I think though that Rod did 2 races in that car, but he wrote it off at Silverstone in the second event. So therefore, Rego Mark 1 did not last very long at all. But they were undeterred and they set about building a Mark 2. This one had a fully enveloping body. And much better, I believe. They'd learnt a lot from Mark 1 and certainly learnt not to do in it. I think occasionally Jim drove it as well as Rod, but I think Jim was more into sort of support, driver, race support and stuff. So Rod was pretty successful. He was a regular finisher, usually in the top 6, I believe. 5th or 6th is what I understand. Usually behind, and it's no surprise really, Lotus 9s and Lotus 11s that were up front of the championship. And you might not be surprised to also hear that Eric Broadley, in his what was retrospectively called Lola Mark 1, was doing pretty well, and he was normally in front of Rod as well. They built those cars in a workshop, or rather, I think it was mainly a shed actually, in Easterling's back garden in Blackheath. And they also had a little works, and well, I don't know if it's a works van. It's one of them had an Anglia van. Now, my dad had one of those when I was a kid. I was about 5, and he had an Anglia van. It was a nippy little thing, especially as he did what Rod did, and he took a bit more weight out of it because they were lighter anyway than the corresponding saloon. And I think lots of youngsters or young men in those days had fun with Anglia vans. And it's a family program, so you know what I'm talking completely from an engineering point of view. But you might not be surprised to hear that Jim often sprinted that van, and I believe he had quite a lot of success in that. Rod's Shed was a popular haunt for local enthusiasts, not only because that part of South London was it wasn't like Hornsey, Chapman's Lotus area at all, but there were some enthusiasts, and they were all interested in what each other was doing. And again, I mentioned that Rod was not trained in any form in automotive engineering, or indeed he taught himself welding. He seemed to be a natural at that because he nailed the art of brazing, which is tricky, and also the art of aluminium welding, which is that's advanced grade. If you know about your welding, you'll know that that's very advanced, and it's difficult for professional welders to master. It's all about burn through. I think it's a thinner material, and therefore, if you're someone that's adept at welding, forgive my ham-fisted explanation to those of us that aren't. I think the material is a thin gauge material, and it's very easy to melt it, but burn through it, and that's not what you want. So he'd have other folk turning up at his garage or his back garden gate with bits and bobs of aluminium under their arm that they wanted him to weld, and he earned a good bit of pin money from doing that, I believe. Anyway, Rego Mark II, said to be immaculate. There are no photos anywhere of any of the Regos other than the Mark IV, which you'll see Neil has put photos of here. They are courtesy of Racing Cars Direct, I think it is racecarsdirect.com. So there's no pointers or guidelines to what they look like at all, but it's said that the Mark II, well turned out, front end elements of Lotus 11 with Lola Mark I inspiration at the rear. Unsurprising, really, given that he'd spend most of his season running around behind those cars. Front suspension was via unequal length wishbones. Live rear axle on Rod's car with trailing arms locating at the rear. He did some races in 1959, but I think he'd spent his money on his Mark II. He wanted to do more, but he simply couldn't afford it. That's kind of the fact of the matter, really. Car had no lights, and I read somewhere there's lots of little snippets in he didn't get a lot of coverage, but he got frequent small snippet coverage in various magazines of the day. And it said that the exhaust was a painfully shrieking one, which I always loved some of the explanations they gave back in those days. But he used it daily on the road, and apparently he was regularly pulled over by the police. But it said that they just wanted to see his trick E93A Ford engine, and they usually turn a blind eye to anything else, to any other misdemeanors that they spotted. I believe. He made a second example for the English brothers, I should say. Although that car is said to have had a restyled tail and with little fins, because fins were the thing back in those days, and it had independent rather than live rear suspension. That car was written off by Dave Inglis quite soon after it was completed, I believe. And typically what happened in those days, ever since Derek Buckler was sprinting his little Mark V, typically other enthusiasts were keen to want a bit of the action of the car that was winning. So people wanted replicas, and they wanted parts, and they wanted really... I do remember, I'm going to slightly just go off piste a little bit. I do remember I love Steve Burton of Burton Power, and I get on very well with him, and he's told me some fabulous stories of what's happened to that, over the years. And he told me once he used to, of course, be very closely associated with Barry Lee, and Steve told me. He's told me a couple of times some great stories about Barry, and one of my heroes, by the way. Although I was a Duffy Collard man, I've got to say, the big three: Duffy Collard, Barry Lee, and the marvellous George Polly, of course. I think they called him the driver. That was his name, his nickname. And Steve was saying that he regularly get people phoning up and saying, "Oh, I want what Barry's got," or I want the same engine parts that Barry's got." But as he said, he used to say to most of them, "There's one problem: you're not Barry Lee," which I thought was quite good. But yeah, loads of little bits and bobs on radio, and most of them 3 or 4 line long. But for people that like trivia, that's real sort of fuel for me, really. So other people ordered, I think 2 definite Mark IIIs were sold, extra ones. Sorry, Mark IIs. Although they were very similar to the Mark II of the 2 that had been built, I think the restyled rear end earned it a new designation of Mark III. I don't believe there was much in the way of mechanical differences, but I guess like Derek Buckler didn't want people to think he was a rookie. I think the more marks you had under your name, under your belt, it gave the impression that you had made more cars than you actually did. And I also love reading old race programs and race reports as well, back in the day, because they were brilliant. Oh, they're brilliant. I'll get them wherever I can find them. And I read one pertaining to the Mark III, which described, there's 2 actually. One of them was Autosport, and another one I can't remember. But the other one I can't remember said that the bodywork GRP bodywork was very lightweight. Little reminder for me, for those that don't know, and we mustn't assume that everybody knows what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about half the time, but that's another story. GRP, glass reinforced plastic. It's another name for fiberglass, although we try not to use that term, because in sort of out of respect for the copyright owners of the name fiberglass. We try and use glass fiber, but of course we do go back into GRP, which is one and the same thing. So if you hear any of those three terms, it's all the same material. So the other magazine described the body as lightweight, whereas Autosport typically described it as flimsy. But both did mention that the Regio Mark III appeared to be very capable. 1961 would see all of the surviving Regio Mark III score wins in the 750s 1172 class. And every report I've seen on them described those cars as being well turned out, so they must have been very well turned out. At this point, I think it was 1961, when Rod and Jim decided to make Regio gentle commercial enterprise. And so they both had day jobs, of course, but they decided, and they worked evenings and weekends on the cars. And so they thought, to satisfy the people's desire for replicas and stuff, they should go a stage further and offer GRP replica body kits, basically a front end and a rear end copy of the Mark III. 110 quid, I think it was. And if you wanted a windscreen, that commanded another £7, 10 shillings. £7.50 in today's money, of course. But I bet it would be more than £7.50 in today's money. I think from what I've read and pieced together what I've read, they might have sold 6 of those kits. And the GRP was done. Anyone in the area, I guess, who wanted anything made out of GRP, really good quality GRP, went to George Bishop's Heron Plastics in nearby Greenwich, which was of very good quality. Rod also decided to sell plan sets for those that wanted them. A magazine item I read from 1962 quotes him as saying that he didn't sell many, and he couldn't actually remember the exact number, but he guessed at about 10. And of that, those if it was 10, it's believed that as many as 6 of the plan-built Regios took to the track or road even. And he gave them a number, even though they were very similar to the Mark III, he designated those Mark IV. There's a couple of those as well, of that 6, or those 6. There were a couple of those that were pretty notable. And I've actually another sort of thing to interject with, that the things I've read about Regios. I mean, a lot of race cars tend to have a lifespan of a season, 2 seasons, 3 seasons before they sort of get overpowered by the latest new model and outgunned, as it were. But Regios apparently were competitive for many years, and we'll come to that as a little point very soon to sort of highlight that fact. One of the 6 of those 2 of the notable cars, a chap called John O'Sullivan, a dentist from Southend-on-Sea, and he was a handy clubman racer, and his little Regio had door lits, I believe, little doors, which kind of complied with Appendix C regs at the time. And his car was powered by a Coventry Climax FWA, little fire pump engine. Although, as we know, if you know your historic motorsport, Climax FWA, FWB, etc., was an engine to have, a jewel-like little creation. Another of those 2 Regios, the other one was built by another seasoned and very decent racer called Pat Ross Tuppin, and he was said to be even more successful. The racing car show at the Royal Horticultural Show in Westminster every January was the place to be if you were launching a new specialist car, or you wanted to buy a specialist car, or you just like us back in those days, we would go along and see what was available. That 62 show marked the debut of 2 very notable cars, notable sports racers that were said to be game changers, and I guess they were. And what were they? They were the Lotus 23 and the Elva Mark VI, mid-engined. And they certainly did put the cat amongst the proverbial pigeons, for sure. And little front-engine cars like the Regios were supposed to struggle against these new arrivals, but clearly Ross Tuppin hadn't read the script, as in that 1962 1972 season, he piloted his Rego Mark IV to third overall in the 1172 series. Behind the champion of that year was a guy called, well, don't need any introduction, Arthur Mallock in his in one of his U2s, and with a chap called Alan Wershart in a Lola Mark I, finishing second. Going back to the longevity of Regos and their competitiveness, I think that was highlighted perfectly by a motoring journalist of the day, a guy called John Anstis Brown, who won the Motoring News Castrol Special GT Championship in 1971 in a Rego Mark VI. And that car had originally been built in early 1964, so 7 years later. I'm guessing he must have been a handy driver, but he won a championship in what was an old car. There's the thing. I guess this might have been. Yeah, this was the. I'm giving secrets away now. This was the piece of information that I wasn't sure about, and I wasn't confident enough to write or do this video, in fact, about Rego until I kind of found out for sure. I've given up hope, really. And this is the thing I found out in the Sports Racer book that I got for £1. It stated that Easterling, by now on his own, I think, by then, 1963, Osborne had gone off to work for, I think it was Parkinson Cowan Measurements, staying within his scientific instruments industry. And at weekends his time was taken up as acting as race support stroke mechanic for a guy called Dennis Taylor, who was a Formula Junior driver, and that took up most of Jim's time. And the Englishes, I think they'd gone on and moved away or whatever, but they've both gone on to proper full-time jobs in the motoring industry. So as Rod didn't think, I guess he felt with his mates moving away or whatever, he felt that he wouldn't be making too many cars, not on his own anyway, and I think he was very happy with what he had achieved to that point. And I think he was keen to pay tribute to the lovely old Lotus 6 that he'd had to sell and that he'd had lots of fun in. So he missed out Mark V, and he went from Mark IV to Mark VI, just to pay tribute to his Lotus Mark VI. That one was said, that the sixth incarnation was said to be very advanced for its time. Semi-monocoque chassis, wishbones all round, Triumph Herald front uprights, inboard dampers with coil springs. Engine of choice for the Mark VI was a Lotus twin cam, which in the one in Easterling's own car produced 145 bhp, which was pretty good for its day. And Rod may have sold another 4 cars, 4 Mark VIs. And as I said from the outset, the plot really on Rod goes a little bit cold after this. I don't think there are any Mark 7s, 8s, 9s, etc. I think Mark 6 was his final hurrah. If you know otherwise, then please always welcome that information, that sort of stuff. If you want interaction on that. But anyway, there we are, short and sweet. I've managed to get under the magic 30-minute barrier, which I'm told I need to do more often. And I hope you enjoyed that story of an unsung little mark that had a real go, well, punched way above their weight, to coin a boxing cliche, and had great fun while doing it. And I think it's fair to say that Rod Easterling was a very clever chap indeed. If you're new around here, welcome. Don't go yet. Have a little listen to what we're trying to do with these little videos, and that is to promote and highlight a wonderful UK kit car industry, which in 2024 celebrated, depending on when you're listening to this, a marvellous 75 years of existence, and it's something we think deserves to be trumpeted, really. And we're doing our little bit in our own way to try and achieve that, really. And if you're an old hand round here, and we welcome you warmly and welcome you back indeed. When I say our, the process we're doing this with in association with the TKC Mag video editor, Neil Winnington, who runs Enwin Motors YouTube channel. And Neil runs some exclusive stuff, we run some exclusive stuff, and there's also a crossover there as well when we run each other's videos, all in the name of promoting the kit car industry. And so if you haven't done so already, if you'd please subscribe to both channels. It won't cost you a penny to do so, and you'll be notified every time a new video drops, or whatever the hell they call it. Modern technology is beyond me, really. I'm stretching. And also, yeah, make sure you hit the all button, because then you'll know everything every time we do one. We do these once a week, normally. Sometimes you're lucky, boys and girls, and you get two, but just depends, really. And also, of course, if you could hit that like button on the way out, that'd be really good. I'm not entirely sure why it'd be really good, but I think it'll be really, really good. So I'm told. So if you could do that, that'd be great. Thank you very much. So anyway, without further ado, this time we're looking at a proper diva. It's a little 60s mark from South London called Diva Cars. They came from a marvellous little place. Now, I come from that part of South London originally, and it's called Penge. Although if people want to be posh in Penge, they used to refer to it as Ponge. And I noticed it, a friend of a friend, I noticed the other day called it West Annerley. And Annerley is a suburb next door neighbour, I guess, if you will, going towards Elmer's End, if you know that part of South London. And he referred to Penge as West Annerley, which is I've heard it all now. And I did actually highlight the fact that I asked him where he lived, and he told me, and I said, no, you live in Penge, mate. Be proud. Anyway, for reference, it's pincered by Crystal Palace, Sydenham, and the aforementioned Annerley. Anyway, I guess only a very few people would know that the Diva Garage business was one of Britain's most successful motorsport marques pro rata, given its size. Tiny company. Another point of fact about Penge, or Ponge, was that Rolling Stones, the late Rolling Stones bassist Bill Wyman, he grew up in Penge. Although I did read somewhere, I think it is his biography, that he described his childhood as scarred by poverty. So I don't know what that says about Penge, or if he was referring to Penge. But anyway, back to Diva. And the man behind the company was an aviation engineer called Don Sim. He was born in Lewisham, another famous South London suburb, in 1931. And after he did his national service in the RAF, he enrolled at the Chelsea College of Automobile and Aircraft Engineering. Where incidentally his classmates included Mike Hawthorne and Jackie Epstein. So aircraft, or aviation in general, and motorsport were very important to Sim in the early 50s. And he built a special on a clapped out Raleigh 9, although he replaced the engine at a later date with a supercharged 1500 Alfa Romeo engine, albeit with no body, that allegedly, and again this is a big allegedly, had previously been driven by Tazio Nuvolari. Okay, moving on. Anyway, Sim had actually bought that project from a chap called Mike Handley, with whom he developed a close friendship, which would later lead them going into business together. They built a car in Sim's garden shed for the 1172 750 Motor Club race class, that was designed by Handley, helped by Sim and Epstein and a few other friends. And while all this was going on, though, Sim landed himself a really plum aviation-related job in Beirut. And when he returned to the UK in 1956, he'd given his instructions while he was away, because I think he was like the band leader. And when he came back, he found that it was nothing like what he wanted or expected or indeed intended. So he started again. He designed a simple ladder frame chassis, used all the running gear from that special, and called it the Yimkin, an Arabic word for maybe. And this led directly to the formation of another little company called Yimkin Engineering, again with Mike Handley in tow. A new prototype was designed for the 1172. I believe it was a basic cycle wing car that Sim raced for 2 seasons.
but inevitably was outgunned by the bigger and more wealthy tuners with bigger budgets. So he switched to a larger my teeth in today. BMC A series engine and moved to the 1000cc sports car class, which he fared a little better. In addition to building those little race cars, Yimkin specialised in A series tuning, and they were pretty successful. Based in the centre of London, Ellis Street, which I believe is just off of just behind the Cadogan Hall in Chelsea, which is like a side road off of Sloane Street, I think. Even back then, Sim was punching above his weight, and even the Yimkin brochure for the day was a very sophisticated little effort with a brilliant strapline on the cover, which read, "Millionaire or penniless enthusiast, the Yimkin is designed for you." And I love that. I love some of those 60s marketing material and their straplines that they used on their brochures. Formula Junior was a popular motorsport category in those days, of course, and in the right hands, Yimkin in a Formula Junior could be really competitive. Fully built, those cars cost £880, which, according to the marvellous inflation tracker that I punched that number into, is about 15 grand in today's prices. Rolling chassis you could buy sort of like a glorified kit from £500. And if you paid them another £50, they build it for you, as long as you took them your engine and gearbox. And most customers chose the full 105E. And they could tune that to you if you wished to stage 3 levels of tune. Ultimately, though, just 6 Yimkins were sold, with 4 of them going overseas. And Handley it was who was always suggesting that they offered a full-blown works Formula Junior car rather than a converted 1172. While he also wanted to develop a road-going car. Although the fact they couldn't really agree, and the fact that the two partners, Handley and Sim, both had young families, young men with young families, Yimkin ceased to exist in late 1960, I think it was. So Sim once again turned to his reliable backstop, the aviation world, and he took a job with BOAC as an engineer on Lockheed Constellations. Although he probably didn't realise then that he hadn't really done with cars, far from it. One of those 2 Yimkins that remained in the UK, one of those 6 Yimkins that remained in the UK, of which there were 2, went to a chap called Leo Bertorelli, and he was one of South London's premier purveyors of ice cream. And Sim and Bertorelli developed a friendship, and indeed the latter, Bertorelli, engaged Sim's tuning skills on his Triumph TR3 that he raced and regularly beat bigger and more lauded rivals. And I think that's indicative of the fact that Sim was a pretty handy engine tuner. And indeed, Bertorelli rated him so highly that he set him up in a garage in Penge. And he also brought in another of his businesses and put it in that garage, Tunex. He ran a company called Tunex Conversions, and Sim was put in charge of that too. Kind of, I think they sort of still ran separately, but they were kind of absorbed into one, if you will. That was an offer that Sim couldn't refuse, even though he had a really good job with BOAC, British Overseas Airways Corporation, I think, which all ended up being funneled into what became British Airways, of course. Anyway, he did indeed go and work in Penge for Bertorelli. Although Bertorelli didn't just want to concentrate on engine building and tuning, he actively encouraged Sim to think about building his own car once more. Although Sim was reluctant after the way that the Yimkin enterprise had ended, but he was persuaded. But then there's another famous, I don't know if it's a quote, if it's a genuine quote, but he was reported to have said, if I do build another car, it won't be a prima donna, or words to that effect. And then I don't know who the works foreman was or his name, but he's reported to have retorted, No, we don't want a Diva, do we? Which I'd love it to be true. If it was, great. Certainly gave the little company its name, Diva Cars. So work really became that plausible explanation for the company name is good, I think. But work began on what became the first Diva, and he actually revised an old Yimkin chassis, fitting it with a live axle, a 750 Formula Heron body. They were another localish little GRP manufacturer, GRP maker and specials builder, and they were run by a guy called George Bishop, and they were based in Greenwich. And that body was made to fit the chassis. Despite Diva Tunix being, they decided to go with a tuned Ford 105E because that's what Sim really knew and liked. And it may not have been the prettiest vehicle, but from the outset, in a guy called John Bloomfield's hands, it was competitive straight out of the gate. 10 podiums with 7 wins from 10 starts in 1962. They built a second car, which is probably more like the car that we kind of associate with being a Diva GT. And that was more sophisticated all round. It had IRS, independent rear suspension, sorry, I shouldn't assume everyone knows what that means. A Watts linkage and Triumph running gear, unsurprisingly. And Sim had designed that new body, but on the eve of the racing car show in 1963, he decided it wasn't right, and they didn't like it. I think he was prone to changing his mind clearly at the last minute, which I think caused a bit of disruption. Anyway, the first proper Diva GT, they were offered as complete kits, and that included the full 105E engine, twin Weber carbs, and stainless steel exhaust for, I think it was £860, which is about £12,500 if you allow for inflation today. They were always struggling for money, even though they had the patronage of Bertorelli. They were always, like all their contemporaries in the 60s, they were always scratching around for money. And I guess someone put this theory to me the other day. Actually, I think it's a very reasonable one. The companies pretty much made too much in house rather than subcontract things out or buy stuff off the shelf. They wanted to build it all in house, and that cost money, of course. And I think that was something that impinged on many of those companies, including Diva. One thing that set that Diva GT apart was the suspension. And it had very long wishbones at the front, I believe. It was notable for that. Although Tunex / Diva never ran an official works race team, Sim and his little band of staff, they readily supported their most successful customers. And one of the most victorious in a Diva was a guy called Doug Mockford. He finished second in the BRSCC's 500 Club Trophy, in the 1000cc class. And even Don Sim would turn out in a Diva GT fairly regularly in that series. And racing indeed was their bread and butter. That was their main core business. Lots of people asked them if they could make a road car, but they always looked at themselves as being a racing car or sports racing car manufacturer. Although there was a tentative step into road going activities. I think in their brochure of 1964, they advertised. They did actually advertise a road going version, priced from £940, 13,300. I think that equates to today, allowing for the dreaded. But I think they only sold 4 of those. So it's clear really that customers saw them as building track cars. The Diva GT Racer, if you just wanted a track version, was £50 more expensive at £990. But I also noticed that they offered, and I find this is great. I love some of this stuff from the 60s, I really do. In the brochure, that 64 brochure, they had a Diva GT, a strengthened model. That was the word they used, strengthened. And they charged £1,117, quite a lot more money for that indeed. But that one also added the option of a 1600 Ford Lotus twin cam engine. although those standard choices were that 105E, or indeed they also offered a Hillman Imp Coventry Climax derived unit. Has to be said though that amongst those club racers and decent ones at that, national level drivers, there were some really good drivers cut their teeth in a Diva. John Miles was one, and I believe, well, in fact, I know Jackie Oliver, late sports car great, and also a Formula 1 driver. He learnt his craft in a Diva GT. John Miles, I think, is notable in a Diva for winning 16 out of 17 races in the Red X Trophy Series in 1965, which is some going. Anyway, in 1960, that same year, 1965, Leo Bertorelli was struggling to run his two businesses. Or sorry, more than that. He had a construction firm, the ice cream business, and Tunex, of course, along with Diva. So he had four businesses. Several were quite diverse from each other. And he wanted to streamline his operations, really. So, in fact, I've used the word Diva when I shouldn't have done, really. Tunex became Diva Cars in 1965. He officially amalgamated the two. Everybody refers to Diva as being Diva right from the outset. But if we're going to look at the official story, Tunex, those first Divas were under the Tunex banner until 65, when Tunex became Diva Cars. Anyway, and Sim and his team moved out to a couple of railway arches in Camberwell. I'm mentioning some really good old South London places here. Behind a chap called John Bloomfield's garage. The parting was a happy one, and Bertorelli retained that premises in Penge. I think his construction company went into there, might be wrong. And he remains an important figure in Diva's history, of course. And he continued to race and do some rallying at national level. And indeed, he sold his ice cream empire to Lyons Maid, a famous, along with Walls, a famous British ice cream maker. Although they kept him on a retainer, on the condition that he got rid of his other business interests, though. That's kind of the kicker, really, which is one of the reasons I think Diva's time was limited, because he had to withdraw his patronage from the company. And Don Sim took over complete control. Let's just talk about Bertorelli for a minute. I was lucky enough. I grew up in that South London area, and I always remember it was an ice cream lover's. If you're a kid then, it was an ice cream lover's paradise, really, because in that area around sort of Catford, Lewisham, South Norwood, there were three companies that were pretty well known on that turf: Tony Bell, Bertorelli, and the name Rossi, which if you found a status quo might ring a bell. Francis Rossi's nan ran an ice cream company in Catford. Proper old school. And I think Rossi's one of my favourite, actually. But as a kid, I remember Tony Bell and I remember Bertorelli ice cream vans. That kind of gives me an indication of how old I am. But anyway, never mind. Anyway, back to Diva. And they introduced a second model, the Valkyr GT. And this one was intended to plug the gap between a track and a road car. So it was a combi car, really. It could be used in either. And it was pretty successful in motorsport. It had similar engineering underpinnings, unsurprisingly, to the Diva GT. But it was prettier, I think, in my eyes. It made its debut at the Racing Car Show of 65, or was it 66? But anyway. Sim now, he was an ambitious chap, and he was always looking for an angle. He's a good South London boy, so he would be. And he built a demo car with a Hillman Imp engine. And the hope of that, he had a little bit of an angle there. He was hoping to persuade Roots' then competition manager, Marcus Chambers, to race a couple as an experiment alongside their existing work Sunbeam Tigers, just to see and to show him what could be done. He even came up with a new name for the Valkyrie, the Demon, which, if you look up the meaning for imp on a search engine, you'll find. There you go. So Demon was a good name, and it was quite clever. Although interested, Chambers never pursued that idea. So Sim picked his toys up and chucked a Ford engine back into, put a Ford engine back into the Valkyrie, well, changed its name back to the Valkyrie in the process. So I think he took his ball, put it under his arm and stropped off, really. That Valkyrie had an interesting, I've seen it described as a birdcage style space frame chassis. It was pretty sophisticated, and it was quite a strong chassis. It could take up to 300 pounds, 300 brake horsepower, according to Diva Car's blurb. One customer did fit a Coventry Climax FPF, which I think is something like a 2.7 litre engine, although there's no record of how successful that was. Rear suspension was as per Diva GT, but the front had an unusual horizontal and coilover arrangement with discs all round. They designed that body, as I mentioned, it was always intended to be slightly more upmarket, and they designed that one with Group 6 race regulations very much in mind. And Doug Mockford again and a guy called Mike Watton were very successful in Valkyries. And in fact, I think Watton actually raced one of those that car that the Demon that Sim had taken to speculatively even taken to Marcus Chambers. By this time, the Tunex Triumph tuning work had stopped, and Diva were concentrating on Ford and now A series primarily, mini engine primarily for tuning purposes and business. Sim had plans for even more sophisticated, dedicated road car, the 10FS, 10F, and he brought in some new investors to help fund the development of that. But rather than silent partners, they got a little bit chirpy and got more involved in the business than Sim was expecting and wanting, indeed. And it wasn't long before his little team were up in arms and began leaving one by one. And I think by sort of late 66, Sim had effectively been forced out of his own company. And so he just went back to a job in aviation. I read something in an old copy of Motorsport magazine where he said of all the mistakes he'd made during his working life, he felt bringing in those new directors was perhaps the biggest. So there we have it, a very successful little sports car company with a potentially bright and very successful future had simply imploded due to politics. And the damage was compounded by 1967 when the company were made part of the Skodek Group, who at the time also owned JAP or JAPS engines and Royal Enfield motorcycle manufacturer. There was a flicker of hope when production shifted to the Isle of Wight, but that was soon extinguished and the curtain or the shutters finally closed on those railway arches for the last time in 1968. And right until the end, Diva customers were winning on the racetrack. Doug Moxford, Jim Hardeman, who I think he was winning the 1300 class at the Nürburgring 1000 kilometre race in 68, finishing a very creditable 38th overall. And all in all, by the time that the fat lady had son, I think that mark had won over 200 races. Not bad for a little company from Penge, I don't think. So if we look at the model chronology, just before we wrap up, the first that modified Heron Europa Heron 750 bodied version has been retrospectively christened the Diva A-type, but the first the Diva that we kind of know and recognise would be the B-type, and they made 6 of those in 1962. And then the first proper GT was the C-type, one of these was converted for road use, indeed, very early on, when it was owned by a chap called Steve Pethybridge, who took car to show at the Hindhead Kitcar show, I remember, in 1978. I remember reading about that in one of Philby's magazines. Then came the D-type in 1964. They made 13 C-types, by the way. And then the biggest selling Diva of all, the D-type, came in 1964. And that had a longer nose and headlights that were ready for road use. And then then came the 10FS we talked about. This was the one that was really aimed at the road, more sophisticated, thicker GRP, proper sound insulation, rubber engine mounts, and it was less hardcore than the others. And it was this car really that ended up that sort of sounded the death knell for Sim to be forced out of Diva. And then the Valkyrie, they made 6 of those. That's all. That first prototype had that Hillman engine and was really called a Demon, really. I think if you look at the Chevron B6, I've looked at that the other day actually. There's some real similarities, and though they were several hundred miles apart, there were some similarities visually between those two cars. But I love both of them actually. Who wouldn't turn down a Chevron B6? But that brings to the end of the little Diva story. So I hope you've enjoyed this one. Thanks for giving up a little part of your day. As I said, if you could hit the like button on the way out, I'll turn the lights off. You hit the like button, and I look forward to welcoming you next time, I hope. And
what a lovely little car that was, and such a rarity. I wonder if there's any still out there. Please, that chassis alone looks like a work of art, doesn't it? Anyway, thank you to everybody who has subscribed and has contributed enormously by watching this series. We are going to make more. We do listen, and the feedback has been absolutely fantastic. I promise you we're going to do more. So those who subscribed, it really does make a huge difference. In fact, just clicking on the thumbs up tells people like us that there's something that people like us like to watch, and that's what the algorithm listens to, and they push this video to people who are interested in historic sports cars, historic kit cars. They will get this link if you click on the thumbs up. But what helps us more than anything, and thank you to all those who have already done it, click on the bell, the subscribe bell, and then click on all. That will tell you when the next one comes, and I promise you the next one is an absolute cracker. But also it helps the channel enormously, and I cannot tell you how much it brings joy when extra people give us the confidence and the support of that little thumbs up. At the moment we are relying quite a bit on the income from the videos, because we're trying to get my father's scimitar, and he's 80 years old. We're trying to get that back on the road, and we're using the funds from this wherever possible to chip away at the costs that's going to incur. So and of course we will be bringing that car onto the channel when it's built, because there's something then to show. So there's something for you and something for us. But if you want to contribute and help us with that, then if you go into the description, you will see that we have a buy me a coffee, and you can help me out with, you know, a cup of coffee or a pizza or something to carry on, or just go onto our Patreon page, where we will be posting further episodes of this series in advance, so that Patreon supporters get to see it first. So thank you to everyone that does that, and thank you to everyone who subscribes. Subscribing costs you nothing, but it helps us enormously, and I cannot tell you how pleased we are with the response to this series. So without further ado, I will say tatty bye, and thank you for watching, and stick around for next week.